when a quiet black maid's mother sat down for a friendly game of chess with a billionaire. No one knew she was about to checkmate the world with her mind, her story, and her heart. Clarissa had worked in the tall glass building in Manhattan for nearly 6 years. Every morning she left her small apartment in the Bronx before the sun rose, carrying her worn-out handbag, a thermos of tea, and sometimes a small snack wrapped in foil. The city was always half asleep when she stepped onto the subway platform. Gray.
Voice with forces of the way, and on with it. With it is a far with a fire with I fair. When farewell, for some fires I way, throw is our
But no matter the weather, Clarissa was always on time. Her job was to clean, organize, and maintain one of the most luxurious penthouses in New York City. The owner of the penthouse was Edward Langston, a billionaire who made his fortune in technology. Edward was rich, powerful, and famous. People followed him on the news. Magazines wrote about his new business deals and the expensive watches he wore. But Clarissa knew him only as Mr. Langston. He rarely spoke to the house staff. He was polite, but distant, like a man who had built a wall of silence around himself. Didn't shout or complain, but he also never smiled or asked questions. He lived in a world of meetings, numbers, and glass walls. Clarissa didn't mind. In fact, she preferred it that way. She came to work, did her job carefully, and left quietly. She didn't want trouble. All she wanted was to go home, cook dinner for her daughter, and check in on her mother. Ruth was Clarissa's mother, and she had come to live with them 2 years ago after a fall left her with a weak hip. At first, Clarissa was worried. The apartment was already small for 2 people, and her teenage daughter, Kiara, needed space too. But Ruth didn't ask for much. She stayed in her room, read books, and drank hot tea. She was soft-spoken, but there was something deep in her eyes, something sharp and alert. Clarissa always knew her mother was intelligent, but she never had the chance to show it. Life had never been easy for their family. When Clarissa was growing up, she remembered her mother always working. First in a factory, then as a library assistant, then cleaning houses. Her father had disappeared when she was young, and Ruth had raised her all alone. She taught Clarissa to be strong, quiet, and responsible. There were no vacations, no birthday parties, just hard work and careful budgeting. But there was one strange thing about her mother. She always carried a small, old wooden box with her wherever she moved. It was carved with symbols Clarissa didn't understand. Once asked about it, Ruth simply said, "It's for the board." Clarissa never really gave it much thought. One day, while wiping down the long dining table that could seat 20 guests, Clarissa overheard Mr. Langston speaking to his assistant. He was planning a weekend gathering at his country estate outside the city, a staff and family picnic to build team morale. The assistant listed names of people who were invited and asked if Clarissa would attend. Mr. Langston paused. Then, in a rare moment of curiosity, he asked, "Does she have any family?" The assistant replied, "She lives with her daughter and her elderly mother, I believe." Edward nodded. "Tell her she can bring them both." Clarissa was surprised when she received the invitation. She had never been invited to any of Mr. Langston's personal events before. When she told her daughter, Kiara was excited. She had only seen such places in movies, big gardens, swimming pools, tennis courts. But Ruth didn't show much emotion. She looked at the invitation, then looked at her daughter and simply said, "I'll come if you want me to." Saturday arrived, and they left early in a black car sent by the office. The drive to the countryside was long, but the trees and green fields brought a sense of peace. Ruth sat quietly, looking out the window, her old handbag on her lap. Kiara asked questions nonstop: what kind of food would be there, if there would be music, if she could swim. Clarissa smiled. She hadn't seen her daughter this excited in months. When they reached the estate, it felt like entering a different world. The mansion was large, with white columns and wide stone steps. Staff greeted them politely. Other workers from the company were there too, some with families, children running on the grass. There were tables set up with food, games, and a live band playing soft jazz under a white tent. Clarissa stayed close to her daughter and mother, not quite sure where they belonged. Most people smiled politely but didn't talk much to them. Ruth, however, seemed comfortable. She walked slowly around the garden, watching everything with sharp eyes. At one point, she stopped near a stone table where a large wooden chessboard had been set up. 2 guests were playing and others were watching. Ruth stood silently nearby, her hands behind her back, her eyes fixed on the board. When one of the players made a move, she raised her eyebrows slightly. She didn't say a word, but Clarissa, who was watching from a few feet away, noticed Mr. Langston arrived a little later, walking across the lawn in a white shirt and sunglasses. He greeted a few guests and then noticed Clarissa standing with her mother. For the first time ever, he walked over. "Clarissa," he said. She nodded, surprised. "Is this your mother?" Ruth smiled gently. "Yes, sir, Ruth Morgan." Shook her hand. "Nice to meet you, Ms. Morgan. Enjoying the afternoon?" "Am." "Your garden is very fine," Ruth said calmly. He followed her gaze and saw she had been watching the chessboard. "Do you play?" he asked, half joking. Ruth looked at him for a moment and replied, "Yes, a little." "Well then," Edward said, smiling, "would you like a game?" Clarissa felt her heart skip. Oh, she probably hasn't played in years, but Ruth was already nodding. "If you don't mind, sir." Edward laughed, amused by her calm confidence. A small crowd formed as he reset the board. He was known to be quite good at chess and often played during board meetings, just to clear his mind. He made his first move with a practiced hand. Ruth answered smoothly. The game began. At first, people watched casually, expecting an easy match. But within 10 minutes, the tone changed. Edward leaned forward, his face tightened. Ruth moved slowly, but with purpose. She didn't hesitate, and every move was thoughtful, almost elegant. She didn't look nervous or proud. She simply played. Piece by piece, Edward's strategy fell apart. His rook was trapped. His queen was forced into retreat. He frowned, then chuckled in disbelief. "You're good," he said. Ruth smiled faintly. "Thank you." 15 more minutes passed. Clarissa stood frozen. Kiara tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Grandma is amazing," she whispered. Edward made a final move and then sighed. "Checkmate," Ruth said softly. There was silence, followed by soft applause from the small crowd. Edward laughed and shook his head. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked. Ruth looked at him calmly. "Long story." Edward was curious now, truly curious. "I have time." Ruth shrugged. "Was taught by a janitor when I was 9, Russian fellow. I practiced with bottle caps on a cardboard board. Played at parks, played in secret clubs in the South. But no one wanted to sponsor a little black girl back then, so I kept playing for myself." Edward was stunned. "You could have been a champion." Ruth smiled. Life had other plans. Clarissa stood there, feeling as if the world had cracked open. For all these years she had known her mother was special, but she had never imagined this. She remembered the wooden box now, the one Ruth kept hidden all her life. Inside, she knew, was her mother's old chess set. Edward turned to Clarissa, his voice softer now. "Your mother is something else." Clarissa nodded, her eyes shining. "Yes, sir, she always has been." From that moment on, something changed. Edward didn't just see Ruth as the maid's mother. He saw her as a person with a mind as sharp as a sword, a story that had never been told. He couldn't stop thinking about how someone like her had gone unnoticed for so long. The first time in years, he felt like he had just lost a game, but gained something far more important. After the picnic at the estate, nothing felt the same again. For Clarissa, It was as if a door had opened to a room in her mother's life that she had never been allowed to see. That one chess game changed everything. Ruth had defeated Edward Langston, one of the richest and most powerful men in the city, in front of his own guests, without raising her voice or showing off. She had simply played, and the whole world had watched in silence as she showed her brilliance on a wooden board with black and white squares. In the days that followed, Clarissa noticed a change in Mr. Langston's behavior. Normally, he never spoke much to her except for a few basic instructions. But now he asked her questions. How's your mother doing? Does she still play chess? Would she be interested in playing another match sometime? Clarissa was surprised by his sudden interest, but she answered politely. She's doing well, sir. And yes, she still plays. One afternoon, Edward called Clarissa into his study. He didn't usually invite staff into that room unless it was for serious matters. Clarissa stepped in nervously. Edward was seated behind a large wooden desk, wearing a gray sweater and reading glasses. He looked more relaxed than usual. I've been thinking, he began. Your mother is extremely talented. That much is clear. I've played chess for over 20 years and I've never been beaten that fast, that cleanly, and without even realizing where I went wrong. Clarissa nodded slowly. She's always been that way, sir. Smart, quiet. She sees things before others do. Edward smiled. Would she be willing to come back to the estate for another match? I'd like to play again. Maybe this time I'll prepare better. Clarissa hesitated. She doesn't like attention. She's not used to being seen. Edward understood. No pressure. But if she agrees, I'd be honored. When Clarissa returned home that evening, she told Ruth about the invitation. Ruth was sitting by the window sipping tea, her eyes on the sky that was slowly turning orange. She listened quietly, then gave a small shrug. If he wants another match, I don't mind. Are you sure? Clarissa asked. You know he's not just being friendly. He's interested in you. In your game. Ruth gave a small smile. Let him be interested. All my life people weren't. Maybe it's time someone was. So the following Sunday, Ruth returned to the estate, this time with just Clarissa. The other staff weren't there, and the house was quiet. Went them at the door himself and led them to the study. The same chessboard was waiting. Pieces were polished, the table freshly cleaned. He pulled out a chair for Ruth like a gentleman and poured tea for both ladies. Before sitting down himself, the game began. This time, Edward was serious. He had studied her style, practiced new strategies, and planned ahead. But within 30 minutes, he was sweating. Ruth didn't rush. She moved slowly but never paused for long. She read the board like a book and understood his intentions before he even made them.
Ow.
She didn't smile or gloat. She played as though the game was a quiet conversation between two minds. When she delivered checkmate again, Edward leaned back and laughed. Unbelievable. You're not just good, you're brilliant. Ruth simply folded her hands in her lap. I've had many years to practice. Edward stared at the board. You know, if you had been born somewhere else in a different time, you could have been a world champion. Ruth shook her head. Maybe, but life gives what it gives. I don't believe in regrets. Then Edward said something unexpected. Would you be interested in playing against someone else? I have a friend who's a chess master. I'd like to invite him over to see you play. Clarissa looked at her mother nervously. Ruth was silent for a moment, then nodded slowly. All right. One game, the next weekend, the guest arrived. His name was Thomas Becker. He was tall, with thick glasses and a serious face. He had represented the U.S. in international chess tournaments and had trained young players across the country. He didn't expect much from Ruth. He thought it would be a nice charity match, something Edward was doing to entertain a family friend. But 20 minutes into the game, Thomas realized something wasn't right. He leaned in, adjusted his glasses, and started frowning. Ruth wasn't just good, she was reading every move before he made it. She forced him into defensive positions, closed his paths, and attacked with quiet precision. People began to gather again, watching the quiet old woman from the Bronx slowly dismantle a professional player. An hour later, Ruth gave her final move. Checkmate. The room went silent. Thomas stared at the board, then looked at Ruth with deep respect, ma'am. May I ask where you trained? Ruth replied softly. I didn't. I just played. Word began to spread. Edward posted a short video clip of the match online without Ruth's name, but people were curious. Who was this older black woman beating a national master in a private home? Chess blogs picked up the story. Discussions began on forums. Thought it was a stunt. Others were amazed. Edward finally posted a longer video along with a short message. This is Ruth Morgan. She's a chess genius, and the world needs to know her story. Within days, reporters were calling. Clarissa was overwhelmed. Their quiet life in the Bronx was suddenly buzzing with attention. Photographers waited outside the building. Journalists called at all hours. But Ruth remained calm. I'm too old to be excited, she said. Let them come. The mask. One interviewer from a popular online channel visited their home and sat with Ruth at the kitchen table. You've never entered a formal tournament? He asked. No, Ruth said. Didn't have the time or the money. Back then, no one believed in a little black girl who played chess better than most men. Where did you play? In parks? In bus stations? On porches? Wherever I could find a board. The interviewer smiled. Would you like to play one more Gammon camera? Ruth opened her wooden box and pulled out her own chess set. Let's play. The video went viral. Millions watched. The comments exploded. People were amazed by her calm energy, her focused eyes, her quiet confidence. They called her the chess grandmother, Queen Ruth, and the forgotten genius. Someone even edited a video showing her best moves and called it the woman who outsmarted billionaires. Edward, who had started all this with a simple match for fun, felt both proud and deeply moved. He invited Ruth to the city's Grand Chess Club to meet other players and teach a master class. At first, the board members were skeptical. But when Ruth played 3 simultaneous games and won all 3, no one doubted her anymore. One of the players she defeated was a young woman from Brooklyn who had been struggling in competitions. After the match, she approached Ruth and said, You've given me hope. I didn't think there was a place for someone like me in chess. Ruth patted her hand. There's always a place. You just have to take it. Clarissa watched all this unfold with a strange mix of joy and disbelief. Her mother, who had once cleaned houses and rode crowded buses in silence, was now being celebrated. Yet Ruth didn't change. She still got up early, still drank her tea quietly, and still kept that old chess set beside her bed. One evening, as Clarissa was washing dishes, she turned to her mother and asked, Why didn't you ever tell me? You were this good? Ruth looked at her daughter and smiled. I didn't think it mattered. I was busy raising you. I had my board, my tea, and my peace. That was enough. Clarissa wiped her hands and walked over to hug her. You matter, Mama. You always did. The next morning, Edward called again. This time he had a new idea. There's a chess exhibition coming up at the public library. Players from all over the country will be there. Would Ruth be interested in attending? Not just as a guest, but as a featured player. Clarissa wasn't sure. That's a lot of attention. She's not young, Edward said gently, but she's powerful. People need to see her. She's already changing how they think. When Clarissa told her mother, Ruth smiled. All right, one more game. And so, the invitation was accepted. The story was no longer just about a quiet game between a maid's mother and a billionaire. It was becoming something much bigger, a story about hidden talent, about forgotten brilliance, and about how genius can exist anywhere, even in silence, even in shadows. And this was only the beginning. When Ruth stepped inside the Grand City Library for the chess exhibition, she looked calm, but Clarissa could feel her mother's hand shaking slightly. The old stone building had wide marble steps and tall glass windows. Inside, there were velvet, ropes, cameras, big banners with the words Chess for All, breaking barriers, and polished chessboards lined up under bright lights. The crowd was filled with well-dressed people, professional players, students, and reporters. For the first time in her life, Ruth wasn't just another quiet woman in the background. She was the main reason people had come. Edward had personally arranged for Ruth to be a featured guest at the exhibition. Her story had touched more people than anyone expected. Social media was still buzzing with clips of her matches. Interviews had been translated into different languages. Some people thought she was a once-in-a-generation talent. Others saw her as a symbol proof that genius doesn't always come from universities or money. It can grow anywhere, even in silence. That evening, the plan was for Ruth to play a simultaneous match against 5 players at once. It was called a simul. She would walk from board to board, facing each player in rotation. The organizers had selected 5 strong opponents to young national champions, a retired grandmaster, a teenage prodigy from California, and a former international women's champion. Each of them had trained for years. They didn't think much of facing a woman in her 60s from the Bronx. They smiled politely. But most of them believed she'd be no real challenge. But they were wrong. Ruth stepped up to each board quietly. She nodded at each player and made her first move. She carried herself with the calm of someone who had played 1,000 games in her mind. The room was silent except for the sounds of the clocks ticking and pieces clicking against the wooden boards. Clarissa sat in the front row, her heart pounding. She remembered being a child and watching her mother play on the back porch with bottle caps, drawing squares with chalk. She remembered how Ruth never explained the game, but always won. Now, her mother stood under the bright lights, holding her own against people who had studied books, attended camps, and traveled the world. 20 minutes into the simul, the retired grandmaster started shaking his head. "She's cutting off my bishop before I even began my plan," he whispered to his neighbor. The young prodigy looked up from his board with wide eyes. She plays like she can see 10 moves ahead. One by one, the 5 games stretched longer than expected. Ruth didn't rush. She moved with elegance, as if painting. Her hands were steady, her face calm. People began whispering. The room filled with quiet energy. Cameras clicked. Even the reporters stopped taking notes and just watched. After 2 hours, Ruth had beaten 3 of the players and drawn against the Grandmaster. Only the teenage prodigy remained, and even he was hanging by a thread. His queen was cornered, his knight trapped. Finally, he tipped his king over with a soft laugh. "She got me," he said. The room burst into applause. Ruth gave a small smile and nodded, then sat down slowly. Edward came up to her beaming. "That was art, Ruth, pure art." But Ruth just sipped her water and said, "It was just a game." What no one knew yet was that Ruth's story went deeper than just games. After the exhibition, more people wanted to know about her life. Newspapers asked for interviews. A documentary crew from a major channel wanted to film her. She was even invited to speak at a local university. Ruth hesitated. "I'm not a speaker," she told Clarissa. "But Mama," Clarissa said softly, "your voice matters now. People are finally listening." So Ruth agreed to a small interview. It was held in their apartment. The interviewer was a young black woman named Tasha, who had followed Ruth's story closely. She didn't bring big cameras or fancy lights, just a microphone, a notebook, and a quiet respect. "Tell me," Tasha asked, "where did this all begin?" Ruth sat back in her chair. "I was 9 years old when I saw a man playing chess outside the community center. He was a Russian janitor named Victor. I asked him what it was, and he said it was a war on a board. I liked that. Asked him to teach me." Tasha listened carefully. "He didn't talk much," Ruth continued, "but he showed me the moves. He said, 'If you want to win, don't think like a pawn. Think like a queen.' That stayed with me." She explained how she used to make boards out of paper. How she learned to predict people's moves by watching their hands, their eyes. She played at bus stops, under trees, anywhere someone had a board. "But why didn't you ever compete?" Tasha asked. Ruth looked down for a long moment. "I tried once," she said, "when I was 17. I entered a local tournament. I was the only girl, the only black one. They made jokes, called me names. After I won 2 games, someone unplugged the clock during my match. The judge blamed me and disqualified me. After that, I just stopped." Tasha's eyes filled with tears. "That wasn't fair, no," Ruth said softly. "But life isn't always fair. That's why I made sure my daughter didn't have to fight the same way." Ruth's interview touched people's hearts again. Her story wasn't just about winning games, it was about survival, dignity, and how talent can be ignored if it doesn't look or speak the way people expect. Soon, a chess foundation reached out. They wanted to honor Ruth at their annual gala and offer her a position as a guest mentor. She would coach young players from underserved communities' kids who were just like she had been. Ruth was quiet for a long time when they made the offer. Then she said, "Yes, but I won't wear heels." Everyone laughed. Clarissa began noticing how their lives were changing. People smiled at her on the train. Neighbors who had never spoken before now waved from their windows. Kiara School invited Ruth to speak at Career Day. And Edward. He became more than just her employer. Became a supporter, a friend, even an admirer. He visited Ruth once a week now, sometimes just to watch her play online games against strangers, which she always won. One day while they were having tea, Edward asked her, "Do you ever regret not pushing harder, not going after championships?" Ruth thought for a moment. "I used to, but now, no. Life happens the way it's meant to, and sometimes a seed that lies in the ground for years still finds its time to bloom." Edward looked thoughtful. "Would you teach me?" Ruth raised an eyebrow. Again, after 2 losses, he smiled. "This time, I want to learn, not just play." So every Sunday, Ruth gave Edward lessons. She didn't just teach him moves. She taught him patience, how to read people, how to wait, how not to panic when a piece is lost. "Sometimes," she said, "losing one piece saves the game." Meanwhile, Clarissa began helping Ruth organize a small chess club in the Bronx. They started in a local church basement with just a few kids. But soon the room was full. Parents brought their children from all over. Some kids were shy, others loud. Many had never played before. Ruth greeted each one with warmth and never judged. She sat beside them, taught them to see the board like a story, not just a game. "There are lessons in chess," she told them. "How to think ahead, how to get up when you lose, how to stay calm when everything's falling apart." One night, a small boy named Jamal asked her, "Were you always this good?" Ruth laughed. "No, I was terrible once, but I kept playing." Clarissa watched from the back of the room, her eyes wet with pride. She had always known her mother was wise. Now the world knew it too. More invitations came. Universities, talk shows, even a proposal to write a book. Ruth refused most of them. "I'm not looking for fame," she said. "I just want to play." But when she was offered a position to coach part-time at a chess academy for disadvantaged youth, she agreed. "This," she said, "is where I belong." From parks to stages, from silence to applause, Ruth's life had taken a path no one saw coming, not even her. But it was never about the spotlight. For Ruth, the greatest joy came not from beating champions or being called a genius. It came from sitting with a child who had never touched a chessboard before, and watching their eyes light up when they made their first clever move. That, to her, was the real checkmate. And the game wasn't over yet. The small church basement in the Bronx, where Ruth first started teaching chess, soon became too crowded. At first, there were only 6 or 7 children, sitting on mismatched plastic chairs, playing on borrowed boards. Some didn't even know how to move the pieces properly. Others only came because their parents insisted. But there was something in Ruth's voice, calm, patient, wise, that kept them coming back. Every time she explained a move, she added a story. "This pawn," she would say, tapping a small piece with her finger, "he may look weak, but if he keeps moving, one step at a time, he can become a queen." The children would lean in. For them, chess became more than just a game. It became a way to think, to feel smart, to believe in themselves. Word spread quickly. Soon kids were showing up from other neighborhoods, even other boroughs. Parents started donating snacks and folding chairs. One mother offered to help print flyers. A local grocery store gave them a small refrigerator for drinks. What started as one old woman teaching chess became a movement. Clarissa watched everything unfold with amazement. Her mother had spent most of her life unnoticed, working quietly in homes that were never hers. Now she stood at the center of a growing community, shaping young minds with nothing but a board and 32 pieces. Clarissa had always known her mother was special, but this was something else entirely. One morning, as they were having breakfast, Ruth casually said, "We need a bigger space." Clarissa looked up from her tea. "For the club?" Ruth nodded. "Can't fit them all in anymore. And the church basement leaks when it rains." Clarissa smiled. "You're becoming quite the organizer." Ruth raised an eyebrow. "Organized a household with 3 generations under one roof for decades. This is easier." Still, finding a bigger space wasn't easy. Rent was high. Spaces were limited. Some landlords didn't take Ruth seriously when she said it was for a chess center. They looked at her and saw only an old black woman with no business background. But Ruth didn't give up. She visited community centers, schools, even empty laundromats. Those places said no. Then, one day, Edward called. "I've been thinking," he said. "That church basement isn't going to last long. Let me help." Clarissa hesitated. "You mean donate?" Edward smiled through the phone. "More than that, I'll fund the space. A real chess center.
Yes.
One with proper tables, lights, even computers for online practice. But only if your mother agrees." Ruth wasn't one to accept charity easily. When Clarissa told her, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "As long as it's for the kids, not for me." So the deal was made. Edward purchased an old bookstore near their neighborhood. The building was dusty, filled with broken shelves and cobwebs. But to Ruth, it was perfect. With a little paint, new lights, and some help from volunteers, it slowly transformed into something beautiful. They called it Queen Ruth's Chess House. The sign was simple, hand-painted by a teenage girl from the club. Inside there were 10 large boards on wooden tables, shelves of chess books, and even a wall with photos of young players and their achievements. Ruth didn't want her picture on the wall, but the children insisted. In the corner hung a small photo of Ruth smiling with a child on either side, both holding trophies. The center opened on a sunny Saturday. The line to get in stretched around the block. People brought flowers, balloons, and thank you cards. Some brought cakes. Local news channels came with cameras. Edward attended the opening and stood quietly at the back, smiling. Ruth gave a short speech. She didn't like microphones, so she spoke softly. "This place," she said, "isn't about me. It's about you. Each of you is like a piece on this board. Some of you feel like pawns. Remember, pawns become queens. Queens can do anything." The crowd clapped, and some people cried. After that, the center became the heart of the community. Children came every day after school. Some came to escape tough situations at home. Some came because they had no other place to go. Ruth welcomed them all. She didn't care if they were loud, quiet, rich, poor, well-behaved, or restless. She taught them the same. Every Friday, they had mini tournaments. The winners got small medals, sometimes just paper certificates with their names. But to them, it felt like winning the world. Parents brought food. Neighbors watched from the windows. The entire street seemed brighter. Ruth didn't take a salary. She said, "I'm too old to spend money on nonsense." But Clarissa made sure she was taken care of. She managed the books, ordered supplies, arranged visits from guest players. Kiara helped too, designing posters and running the social media page for the center. She was proud of her grandmother, so proud that she wrote an essay about her for school. The essay went viral online, and soon, even more people learned about Queen Ruth. One day, an email arrived from the State Chess Federation. They wanted to honor Ruth with a Lifetime Achievement Award for her contribution to the game and her work with young players. Ruth wasn't sure she wanted to accept it. "I didn't win trophies," she said. "I just played in the parks," but Clarissa convinced her. "You've done more for chess than half the people with trophies. You've showed the world something they forgot. Chess is for everyone." The award ceremony was held at a fancy hotel. Ruth wore a blue dress and a silver necklace Clarissa gave her years ago. When her name was announced, the entire room stood up. People cheered, clapped, even shouted. Ruth walked to the stage slowly, leaning on her cane, and gave a small smile. "I'm not good with speeches," she began, "but I'll say this. If you want to find talent, look everywhere. Look in the parks. Look in the bus stops. Look in the quiet corners where people don't usually look. You'll find it there. The crowd gave her a standing ovation. After the event, a famous chess grandmaster approached her. He said, "I've played in 5 countries. But your game's there. Like poetry? Will you teach me?" Ruth chuckled, "If you promise not to talk too much." That night as they returned home, Ruth sat by the window of the car, looking out at the city lights. Clarissa asked, "What are you thinking about?" Ruth whispered, "I'm thinking, maybe I was never meant to win a trophy. Maybe I was meant to help others win theirs." The next day at the chess center, Ruth met a new student. Small girl with glasses, no more than 7, holding a board. With missing pieces. "Do you know how to play?" Ruth asked. The girl shook her head. "No, ma'am, but I want to learn. I want to be smart like you." Ruth smiled. "Sit with me. Let's begin." And so the lessons continued. The center grew. More children came. More parents got involved. A retired teacher offered to help with reading lessons. A carpenter built a new bookshelf. A restaurant owner nearby began donating hot meals on Fridays. The little building became more than just a chess house. It became a home for hope. Clarissa sometimes sat in the back and watched her mother with quiet admiration. Ruth never raised her voice. She never needed to. She taught by example. She moved through life the same way she moved on the board with patience, with purpose, and with power. One afternoon, Edward visited the center unannounced. He watched a match between 2 young girls and smiled as they debated over a move. Then he turned to Clarissa. "This center," he said, "is more powerful than any business I've built." Clarissa nodded. "It's not just a building. It's a mirror. People see their worth in it." Ruth joined them later and asked Edward, "Have you been practicing?" He laughed. "Yes, I haven't lost online in 2 weeks." She raised an eyebrow. "Then it's time you lost again. Sit down." And they played just like before. Quietly, thoughtfully. 2 minds connected over a simple game. Outside, children laughed. Pieces clicked. A boy shouted, "Check." His opponent grinned. The neighborhood was alive with something new pride. And in the middle of it all was Ruth Morgan, a woman who had waited a lifetime to be seen, a woman who had turned pain into purpose, silence into strength, and a simple game into a bridge that connected lives. She was no longer just a maid's mother. She was Queen Ruth, and her legacy had only just begun. On a quiet Saturday morning, the doors of Queen Ruth's chess house opened like any other day. The sun had just started to shine through the windows, lighting up the simple wooden boards and white-painted walls. A small group of children walked in, backpacks swinging from their shoulders, smiling and waving as they greeted each other. Some sat down and began to set up pieces. Others went to the shelf to grab books. The energy inside was calm but full of promise. That day, Ruth sat at her usual spot by the window, wearing her favorite brown cardigan and a soft gray scarf around her neck. It had been over a year since she first played against Edward Langston in his country estate. So much had changed since then. People knew her now not just in the Bronx, not just in New York, but across the country and even around the world. Her story had appeared in magazines, newspapers, podcasts, and documentaries. A short film about her life had won an award at a local film festival. Still, Ruth never let fame change her. She still used the same chipped mug for tea. She still rode the subway when she could have easily called for a car. And she still said no to more offers than she accepted. Her heart belonged to the little chess center and the children who walked through its doors. That morning, something special was happening. A group of new children from another neighborhood was visiting for the first time. Among them was a boy named Leo, only 9 years old. He had never played chess before. His hands were small and his shoes were worn. He looked nervous and out of place. Ruth noticed him right away. She called him over gently and asked, "Would you like to learn?" Leo nodded but didn't say much. Ruth sat him down in front of her and slowly began to explain the pieces. "This one is the rook. He moves in straight lines. This is the knight. He moves in a funny L shape. Don't laugh at him, he's clever." Leo smiled. A little. He listened carefully and watched her every move. By the end of the hour, he had played his first full game. He didn't win, but Ruth smiled warmly and said, "You've played with your heart." "That's more important than winning," Leo returned. The next day, and the next. Soon, he was one of the fastest learners in the group. It was moments like these that gave Ruth the most joy, not the awards, not the speeches, but the quiet growth of children who once didn't believe in themselves. Meanwhile, Clarissa had taken over most of the management work at the center. She handled donations, scheduled classes, answered emails, and helped organize tournaments. She had become the solid foundation that kept everything running smoothly. Kiara, now in her late teens, had developed a strong interest in digital design and began creating chess-themed graphics, social media posts, and videos about the center. The whole family was involved. What had started as one small single game on a sunny afternoon had now become their shared mission. Edward Langston continued to support them, not only financially, but also by connecting them with organizations and educators. Even started a new initiative in his company that funded after-school programs, like Queen Ruth's Chess House in other parts of the city. He often visited the center, sometimes with his assistant, sometimes alone. But whenever he came, he always brought a new chess book or a thoughtful question for Ruth. "What do you think of this strategy?" he would ask. Or "How would you handle this endgame?" Ruth loved those moments. She never treated Edward like a billionaire. She treated him like a student, and he respected her all the more for it. One afternoon, Edward sat beside Ruth after watching her beat 3 students in a row. He leaned back in his chair and said, "You know, Ruth, you've built something stronger than any company I've ever owned." Ruth sipped her tea and said simply, "I didn't build it alone." That week, a group of teachers from different schools visited the center. They wanted to learn how to use chess in classrooms, to help children focus, build confidence, and solve problems. Ruth gave a short workshop, sharing her methods not from books, but from her own experience. She told them how she used storytelling to teach the game, how every child had a different way of thinking, how chess wasn't just about logic, but about life. The teachers left inspired, and soon schools began adding chess programs. Based on Ruth's style of teaching, one of the proudest moments came when Ruth received a letter from the National Chess Education Board. They wanted to include her in their official Hall of Honor, not for tournament wins, the letter said, but for transforming lives through chess. When Clarissa read the letter out loud, Ruth stayed quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I never thought this old lady would end up in a hall of anything." The ceremony was held in Washington, D.C. Ruth was given a gold medallion, and the crowd gave her a long-standing ovation. After the event, a reporter asked, "What would you say to someone who's talented but hasn't been discovered yet?" Ruth looked straight at the camera and said, "Keep playing, even if no one's watching. Even if no one believes you, one day, the right person will see you. But you have to believe in yourself first." That quote was shared all over the internet. Back home, things continued as usual. Ruth kept teaching. The center kept growing. More volunteers joined. Local businesses donated chess sets. A retired coach offered free lessons every weekend. Children began winning local and even state tournaments. Ruth always cheered them on, but never took the credit. "They did it," she'd say, "not me." But her age was catching up with her. There were days when her hands trembled. Her steps were slower. Clarissa noticed and started asking her to rest more. Ruth would only say, "As long as I can still move a piece, I'll be here." One chilly morning, as snowflakes floated outside the window, Ruth walked into the center with her cane in one hand and a box in the other. It was her old chess set, the same one she had carried for decades. She placed it on a shelf in the center behind glass. "It's time this board belonged to everyone," she said. The children gathered around it as if it were a treasure. To them, it was. That board had seen more than just games. It had witnessed a life of struggle, courage, wisdom, and quiet victory. A month later, something special happened. A young girl from the center named Amina was invited to represent New York in a national youth chess tournament. She had only learned to play a year ago, taught entirely by Ruth. Before she left, she asked Ruth for advice. "Just remember," Ruth said with a smile, "you are not just playing pieces. You're telling a story. make it a good one. I mean, a 1/3 place in the entire country. When she returned, the whole neighborhood celebrated. Ruth sat with her, proud but humble. "You're going to go farther than I ever did," she said softly. But Amina shook her head. "Only because you showed me the way." Ruth became more than a personal journey. It became a legacy. Universities began using her life as a case study in leadership and education. Chess clubs around the world honored her with tournaments in her name. And most importantly, children who never felt important before began to see themselves as powerful, valuable, and full of possibility. On the center's 2nd anniversary, a huge celebration was held. Music played. Banners waved. Former students returned, some now in college, others working. All of them came back to thank Ruth. That day, Ruth didn't play any games. She just sat in her chair, holding Clarissa's hand, watching the joy she had helped build. Later that evening, after everyone had gone, Ruth stood by the door. Looking at the now empty center, Clarissa came beside her. "You okay, Mama?" Nodded. "I was just thinking. It's funny how one small move can change everything." Clarissa smiled, like a pawn becoming a queen. Ruth chuckled. "Exactly." Not long after, Ruth began writing a short book with Clarissa's help. It wasn't just about chess. It was about her life, her lessons, her hopes.
What?
Simple. The Queen Who Waited. When it was published, it became a bestseller. People from all walks of life read it, not just chess players. Teachers, mothers, dreamers, and even people in faraway countries wrote letters saying how Ruth's story gave them strength. Even in her final years, Ruth continued teaching. When she could no longer move the pieces herself, she gave instructions. When her voice grew tired, she let the children guide the games. And even when her hands trembled too much, she'd say, "Use your eyes. The game is in the mind." The day Ruth passed, the entire neighborhood fell silent. News spread quickly. Tributes poured in. People left flowers at the door of the chess center. Children drew pictures of her. Former students flew back to attend her memorial. Edward, with tears in his eyes, said, "She taught me more in one game than I learned in 20 years of business." At her memorial, Clarissa spoke with a trembling voice. She was more than a mother, more than a teacher. She was a light for people who had been living in darkness. She made us believe in ourselves. She made the world a better place. After that, the Chess Center was renamed the Ruth Morgan Chess Institute. A scholarship was created in her, named to support young players from underprivileged backgrounds. Every year on her birthday, a citywide chess tournament is held in her honor, open to all, free of charge. And even now, whenever a child picks up a pawn and learns to move it forward, for the very first time, Ruth Morgan's story begins again, quietly, simply, beautifully. Her legacy lives on.